Welcome back, everyone, to the Reading by Candlelight Book Club at Molly's Cottage. I'm here with Angie Faye Martin, author of Melaleuca, which features in the June crime thriller book box. Welcome, Angie.
Hello, everybody.
It's so lovely to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me, Fiona. I really appreciate it. And thank you to Molly as well. Molly
Before
and Tom.
and before we begin, here's a little bit about Angie. She's a writer and editor of 𝘔𝘌𝘓𝘈𝘓𝘌𝘓𝘈𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝑟𝑜𝑦. Kumalaroy, and European heritage. Angie has spent many years working in policy roles in state and federal government using her bachelor's in public health and master's in anthropology, but now has her own professional writing and editing business called First Writings. Angie's debut novel, Melaleuca, won the HarperCollins First Nations Fellowship and was published this year on the 30th of May. And there it is. Isn't it gorgeous? Now, to start us off, Angie, are you able to give us a quick spoiler-free pitch of your book?
Yeah, I sure can. Okay, so Melaleuca is it's a murder mystery. It is about Detective Renee Taylor, and she's an Aboriginal woman who has a really good career down in the city. So she lives in Brisbane, and she's worked her way up the ranks. And she wants to stay there, but she gets a call from her mother who is suffering from debilitating arthritis. So, not osteoarthritis, but rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know if you've ever seen someone, but I had a family member who had rheumatoid arthritis and it's crippling. Anyway, they can't get a carer out in the country town where her mum is, where she grew up. And so Renee agrees to go out there and she arranges a secondment through work. And so she's demoted to being a constable, which she's not too impressed about. And she's not expecting to get up to too much while she's out in 𝘔𝘌𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓, just maybe some speeding tickets and whatever. She's pretty not excited about the prospect. But then on day two, the body of an Aboriginal woman is found down by the creek. And this is quite perplexing because nobody knows who this woman is or what happened to her. So Renee is assigned to the investigation, and typical Renee, she's very stubborn and persistent, and she gets right into the case and analyzes it. She's frustrated because no one's really taking it seriously. They think it's an Aboriginal woman who's just, gone for a walk or whatever. They don't take anything seriously. And they don't think foul play is at hand. And Renee insists that they follow through. So then, in the course of the investigation, she discovers a link between two missing women, two Aboriginal women who went missing about 30 years ago. And so Renee discovers this link, and then the story, it actually is dual timeline. So Renee's part is told in the year 2000, and then I've got a flashback to a dual timeline, which is 1965, and that's told from the perspective of Caroline, who's a young Aboriginal woman living on the 𝘔𝘌𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓𝘓, which is a camp, an Aboriginal camp. We'll probably go through that in more detail later on, but that is my spoiler-free pitch. So that's essentially what Melaleuca is about.
Well done. Now, just to touch on the title for a moment, I think you've probably now brought Melaleuca into popular culture. Why exactly did you call it that?
So actually, the original title of the story, the working title was The Paperbark Trees.
Ah,
And I decided on the paperbark trees because where I was living at the time, there were lots of paperbark trees, lots of Melaleuca trees, and I was quite fascinated by the bark. And so when I was walking around, the suburb and coming up with this plot line, I would, pick bits of the bark off the trees. And I just thought, what a cool analogy for people's personalities in a crime novel. Like, do you ever really know someone, and how many layers are there to people's personality? So it was originally called The Paperbark Trees and inspired by the bark. But then I got, more and more fascinated by the plant. And the story evolved, so did my interest in the healing properties of Melaleuca. And so there's also one of the characters, she makes tea tree oil, which is Melaleuca oil, from the plants around the camp. So I've woven in various aspects of the plant. Even the blossoms appear a little bit. The smell of the blossoms are quite soothing to Renee when she smells them. And yeah, so that's Melaleuca. That's where the title came from.
Yeah, I love the title because it's very evocative, and it does. There is that thread all the way through the book where you touch on things about it, so it all ties in together. I think it's a beautiful title.
Yeah, sometimes, it's healing, and sometimes it alludes to that bark and the layers of personality. So I've got a little bit of all the parts of the tree in there.
I love that analogy. Now, your protagonist, Renee Taylor, as you said, is Aboriginal and a police officer, and I can't think of a character like her before now in any of the books. I love, I love that.
Yeah, she's pretty unique. She didn't come to me straight away. I've been actually working on this book for 10 years, on and off for 10 years. And so, through the drafting process and through feedback, working with editors and mentors, encouraging me to find my own voice and use my own voice, this character of Renee really shone through. I think in early drafts, Renee was a little bit more timid and vulnerable. She's still vulnerable in the later drafts, but I think she wasn't as fierce and assertive. But as I developed the detective and, wanted to make the story a bit more exciting and raise the stakes, to keep it a suspense book and keep it a page turner, Renee became more and more assertive. And I often tell people she's like a little bit of a blend between. I channeled my sister a lot when I was writing Renee's character because my sister is actually a very assertive, very sharp intellect. She has an incredibly sharp intellect. And she works very high up in government. So I don't relate to some of the assertiveness that the character of Renee portrays. I think I'm a little bit more dreamy and probably idealistic, more like Carolyn's character in the 1960s. So I channeled various people to write Renee's character.
Loved how flawed she was because I hate perfect characters. And
Yeah.
yeah, and her conversations with her mother, who she's moving back in with to care for, it made me giggle because they were such a pair. They must have been a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, look, I've got to admit that dry humor is very much my mother. So I think the conversations between Renee and Val are, the type of humor that really me and my mum have. Um, but yeah, she's a realistic character, and it was important for me to make a flawed character, because I think that's what I enjoy reading. I don't want to read a character that's perfect. And for Renee, like sometimes she's a real bitch. She gets really. I remember laughing when I was writing one scene because she tells Stacy, who's really quite a lovely assistant at the police station. She's like, I just don't want a bicky, Stacey. She gets really cranky with her, and she's even a bit mean to Roger, who's like such a lovely police officer as well. But I did that deliberately, I think, to kind of give people insight, particularly non-Indigenous people, into just gently some of the cultural load that Aboriginal people carry. So it's like, there's so much that sometimes you get a bit bitter and frustrated just by the easiness of life sometimes. And maybe we've got blinkers as well, but I think I mentioned that in the first few chapters where Renee's, a bit bitter towards Stacey because she just thinks, oh, you've got it so easy. And that's just like letting readers a little bit into my inner world. I know I'm privileged in certain aspects. I'm quite comfortable nowadays, but that a little bit of the microaggressions and the racism that you come across as an Aboriginal woman, I've tried to convey that in Melaleuca as well through Renee's
Yes,
character.
I think you've done that really well too, because even though she's in a position of authority, not all everybody treats her with respect.
Yeah, particularly the journalists don't treat her with respect. And yeah, some of Lennon, who's one of the characters, kind of second guesses her, and So it's frustrating. Sometimes even, through Lennon's character, I showed how sometimes non-Indigenous people can out-culture Aboriginal people, which can be really frustrating, and I actually experienced that in government myself, where people would try to explain self-determination to me or something. I was like, am I really that light-skinned? Or do you really not know that I'm Aboriginal? You know what I mean?
Yes,
And
yes.
you let it
Like
slide.
some of the things that he says to her, I think, oh my goodness, how's she not hit him yet?
Yeah. Yeah. That was letting out a little bit of my experiences from government. I haven't actually talked about that in any of the talks. I've had quite a few talks around Queensland so far, but Lennon's character hasn't come up, and that is a big reason why I wrote the book, actually, is just being frustrated in the public service and not being heard, and having Melaleuca as an escape, so I could canvas all these ideas.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. What I loved about her the most, I think, it's her struggle to find out the truth and about the
Mm.
past and her tenacity and her passion. And they just allow her to discover the truth, which is just, it's, it's just such a satisfying premise, but it's compelling to read how
I
she
had very good mentors along the way. I remember one early draft. So Amy Matthews is a writer over in Adelaide, and she was assigned my mentor as part of the HarperCollins First Nations Commercial Fiction Fellowship, which I won in 2019. And I remember an early draft, I had Renee being rescued by a man. And didn't I get it? Like, she was very eloquently pointed out that maybe it would be a stronger narrative if Renee saved herself. And I was a bit embarrassed because I really wanted to impress her at the time. But you learn these things along the way. And I thought, yeah, I'll rewrite that. Renee can save herself.
yes, she can.
She can save herself.
She can. What was it that inspired you to write this particular story? So, that not just with an Aboriginal detective, but a story that looks at the horrors towards Aboriginal women.
I didn't set out to write about it, to be honest. I think it came to me naturally because it's just, unfortunately, it's part of our culture. Violence against women in Australia is that epidemic proportions across the board. It's disgusting. But particularly for Aboriginal women, the rates, the homicide rates are
It's
much higher. And I think from an early age, I just knew this. Um, and, you'd hear people talking, or, my parents were very protective of my safety. I wasn't allowed to, um, I had strict curfews. I wasn't allowed to go out much when I was young. And I think I just developed a bit of a sense for how violent society is. And so I didn't do it deliberately. I like writing crime and I like writing twisty thrillers. And that's what I started just playing around with as an escape from my public service job. Like, just because I just wanted, to write something, and I fell in love with just the creative process of writing a scene. So these other themes of racism and misogyny, um, particularly, yeah, in just Australian culture and Australian society, naturally came out. And so it's kind of, I'm just happy that it's giving a voice and highlighting this issue. And I just hope that I've done it in a really respectful way.
oh no, you have. It's completely respectful.
Mm,
I think that the way that you've handled it all is brilliantly, and you've shown it through the actions of others, not through the words that you're making them say, which is a much cleverer way of putting it in a book.
yeah, and there were some scenes actually that I found at the end I've taken out. So there were some scenes I think I needed to write down to know what happened.
Yeah.
And they were very difficult scenes. There were some scenes of sexual violence that I actually did write, and I was just exhausted and traumatized by the end of the day. And in the end, I took them out because they didn't need to be there for the narrative tension or the character development. I think I needed to go through that process myself just so I could feel what the characters, to a certain extent, what the characters had been through. And then for those plot points, they ended up just becoming dialogue and reflections later on.
That makes sense, yes. And it
Yeah,
would make it for a much stronger plot as well. Not
yeah.
having, not you don't have to see
You
everything.
don't have to see it.
No,
No. And your
no,
readers don't want to. And sometimes it has more effect if you don't see it.
yes,
If
I
it's just
agree.
alluded to, you
Yes.
know.
Now, our readers know how much I love a dual timeline, and you have a brilliant one in this book, Carolyn in 1965 and Renee in 2000. And as was said, Renee is investigating this murder of a young woman in a small town, and it has this connection to the past and the disappearance of the two young Aboriginal women 30 years earlier, which include Caroline. And I must say, as much as I enjoyed Renee's story, I truly loved seeing the world from Caroline's point of view in 1965. It was so beautifully told. I learned
Mm,
so much from understanding the story from her point of view, especially in light of her experience with white characters. It made my blood
mm.
boil. So, my question is, what made it important for you to tell the story using the two timelines and from both of their points of view?
Oh, so I think I really enjoyed writing from Caroline's perspective.
Mm.
I think Caroline's character helped balance out Renee's a little bit. She's a much different personality. She's much more idealistic and dreamy. And I wanted to give readers an insight into what life was like in the 1960s pre referendum. So, Caroline lives on a fringe camp with her sister Millie and her grandfather Pa Quincy on a yamba. So, in my father's language, Kuma, that means camp. But it was important for me to show that what Caroline has with her sister and her grandfather on the camp is actually a really lovely little home. It's warm, they have cups of tea, they sit around the fireplace, despite the absolute poverty that they're in and the racism that they feel from outside of town. I wanted to show people the human nature of what it was like. It's still a home, even though it's just a building made from bits and pieces that the residents have collected from the dump. And so my dad grew up on a yamba. So he grew up on the Charleville yamba in the 50s and 60s before the referendum came in the 1960, what was it, 66? I can never remember if it's 66 or 67, but anyway, the referendum came and then that allowed Aboriginal people to be counted in the census and therefore better policies could be designed around social housing, health and things like that. So once the referendum came, then my dad and his family could move off the Yamba into proper housing. So I wrote from this timeline because I had been raised hearing stories about what life was like on the Yamba and how hard my dad and the family worked to get off the build a life, pursue education, pursue employment. Um, and I was taken out there when I was 8 years old and shown the little space where dad had lived with his siblings and his mum and dad at the time. And it was just so small. And I guess that just stayed with me. And it's just, the plants and the scenery out around Charleville. I just thought it made for such a beautiful setting. Um, but then I also want to acknowledge that I have a non-Indigenous family who grew up around Oakey who are farmers. And I also wanted to pay respects to their community, even though there is some racism amongst the pastoralists. I really love what my Nana and Pop did. They were farmers, very down to earth, very loving and welcoming and charitable people. And I think I've tried to portray that through some of the farming community in the 1960s timeline as well, and that
Yeah,
generosity.
because there's
Mhm.
good people there as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and they're embarrassed by how some of their fellow people treat Carolyn in particular. And I think that, no, I think I'm so glad that you put it in because it was such a beautiful part of the story. And I really think that, it gave a gentler aspect to
mm.
to things that were happening in the future. And is there a special reason why you called her Renee?
Um, I just really like the name, but I kind of like the symbolism of Renaissance that it comes
Yeah,
with, like a rebirth.
yeah. Because it,
Yeah.
yeah, it does mean reborn in
Mm.
French, I think. And yes, when I was reading it, I think, oh, that was interesting, especially seeing as my surname's Taylor, you see. So,
Oh, yeah, of course. It was actually Renee Burns in the first draft.
oh,
And then I thought it sounded a bit too corny because she's like Renee Burns. So I just took it out, made it Taylor.
names are so hard, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. It's and then people change name. I've got friends, who are authors and they say and they change the name and then they continue to call that person by the old name and then nobody ever knows what they're talking.
I know that happens to me too. Like Violet in Melaleuca was originally Poppy, and in my mind, she's always Poppy.
I like that. Now, you set the book in a fictitious town in Outback, Queensland, and you've called it Garunga. Is it
Hmm.
based on a town you know, though?
Yeah, so this is pretty much Oki where I grew up. So I grew up, where is it? There's a little map at the front of the book.
Yes, I love maps too. I'm a big
Yeah,
map
and
lover.
I say, my characters and their actions are not representative of any of the people from this town, past or present, just so nobody gets any ideas. Um, but look, I think I just when I was living in Oki when I was younger, like I was a typical teenager, I couldn't wait to get out of the place. But then later on in life, like my family, my dad still lives out there. When I was in the COVID lockdowns down in Melbourne and writing a lot of this book, I was very nostalgic for Oki and really like really missing it actually. So my grandfather he was quite sick up in Oki and I couldn't get to him. And then my nana on the other side, my Aboriginal grandmother, I would call her and she would tell me stories and her and my dad would sit around in the living room and answer my questions about the Yamba and what it was like. And so yeah, I was nostalgic for Oki, but then I think I also just played around the town so much as a kid. Like this is back in the time before iPads and iPhones and stuff, when mum would just say, go out and play outside. And we would spend literally all day by the creek or at the swimming pool. So I just felt like Oki was really imprinted on me and it's so easy to write about.
Yes, and it did feel like a town that you really, really knew.
Mm.
Yeah. Did
I
you need
wanted to make it fictitious, but it was just like at a certain point, I just gave up and said, oh, I'm just going to let people know that it's okay.
Now, did you need to do a lot of research for the book? You said that you spoke to your dad and your grandma, but
Mm.
and they gave you background on the things in the past, but then you've got police procedural in it.
Yeah, I reckon that's my weakest part actually, is the police procedural stuff. So I do watch a lot of crime. I read a lot of crime. I watch a lot of, documentaries. My neighbor's son is a detective. Whenever anything got too tricky, I'd just go over and ask him. Um, but I did struggle with that part. I think that was my toughest learning curve. What I did was I let the story come first because I always think the story is most important. So I'd put usually my best guess in. So if it was something technical like, I don't know, how long until the body goes cold or, to touch, tech forensic details. I'd just put in my best guess and then later on, so then I'd keep the story going, keep drafting. And then later on, I'd just do the desktop research or ask whoever I needed to.
Oh,
Most
that's
things you can kind of find out online. Most forensic things you can research online. Um, but like, for example, I referred to the headquarter police station as Central Station for a long time because that's what I did as a public service. I'd refer to Canberra as Central Office. And then I was chatting to um, our friend who's a detective, and he's like, no, we say HQ or headquarters. So I just did a search and replace for that to get the vernacular a little bit more realistic.
and what would you like readers to be thinking about after they've finished your book?
I think it's for me, oh, there's so much to be
I know
honest.
it's a
Like
hard question.
a lot is the cultural load of an Aboriginal person through Renee's, just those gentle reminders of what she's going through. I think it's also a window into Aboriginal communities that um, may not be as well represented on in films and books as others have been. So I think Southern Queensland communities. Uncle Herb Wharton wrote about what was it from the Yumba and cattle camp about these Yumbas in southern Queensland, but it hasn't been quite that widely documented. So a window into just the discrimination and how far we've come as well, and like to be proud of how far we've come and not slip back. Like a lot of really positive policies were put in place, and affirmative action policies, and people got jobs and educated and were able to, and then also some land was given back. So cultural pride has also regenerated. So shining a light on that window. And yeah, I think I've already talked about just the violence against women, if, a human centered perspective on that, because we all know the statistics, but, you know, I
Yes,
think,
you and in your acknowledgements, and it was very confronting to read that information, because we know, as a white woman, I know what violence against women is. I didn't realize it was so high
mm.
against women of color.
Yeah, and there's just so many other barriers as well, like Aboriginal women, if you call the cops, and I'm not an expert on this area either. There's other people that write about it in much more detail and research, but Aboriginal women are just not as we're not listened when we call the cops. We're often seen as the perpetrators of violence. So it's just really tricky system to navigate.
No, I think that, yeah, it's when I finished it, I was really interested to read what you'd written afterwards, and
Mm.
the way that it gave me a different point of view into that. I just didn't realize it was that bad, and I'm so sorry that it is.
Yeah, well, uh, where there was a Senate inquiry last year into missing and murdered Indigenous women. And look, I think it didn't get much media attention, which is a real shame. But I think the findings and the recommendations from that, it's there, so it's not too late. We can go back and have a look because the work was done. Um,
And you have talked about the fact that those scenes that you took out were very difficult to write. Were there any that were especially satisfying?
like I said, the camp scenes that were just the gentle conversations I really enjoyed between the characters. I liked writing dialogue. So the conversations between Renee and her mum, like when Renee's mother has a fall and she doesn't want Renee to call the ambulance and she falls over in the bathroom and the undies are like, I was laughing when I was writing that. Um, yeah, often the humor would just come out naturally, and that would, and I would wonder to myself, like, I wonder if other people get a chuckle out of this because I'm like, or if it's just me. Have I had too much caffeine here or not enough sleep? So they were fun. And then just the gentle conversations. I really liked writing Park Quincy's characters. So Park Quincy is like, the perfect grandfather. He's a bit corny, I know.
Oh, but I thought he was really sweet.
He's so sweet. He calls Millie and Caroline princess and queenie, and it's just like such a beautiful man. So I enjoyed, even though I felt like I went into a really corny part of myself when I was writing, I was like, oh, that's so sweet. That's so sweet. But I sometimes when you're writing, you just have to suspend criticism for a while. You just put your criticism aside, and go with it. So
Definitely. Now, congratulations on being selected by QBD's book fiction book of the month.
yes, that blew me away. My publisher called me. It was only 3 or 4 weeks ago now. She called me on a Thursday afternoon and I was just like, okay, what does that mean? But it's been amazing. Like, so as part of the deal, you go around to all the bookshops and meet the staff and sign the books. And they're all so down to earth and really, that's been one of the highlights so far, actually. When I go into the shops, they ask me, how do I sell the book? And
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's so sweet. I went into a QBD recently and yeah, your book was there and I said to the girl, "Is it okay if I take a photo of that?" And I took a photo of it and I think I posted it on my stories that you were in there. And she said, "Can I just tell you about it? It's a really wonderful book. You will really enjoy it." And I
Mhm.
said, "Oh, yeah, I'm reading it at the moment." She goes, "Oh, that's good." And
Yeah.
I didn't tell her I was going to interview the author. I think it would have knocked her sideways. But it was just beautiful and it was all, out there for everyone to see. But
Yeah.
what
Yeah, they're
was it
amazing.
like holding your book for the first time?
I honestly, it's all still so surreal, like I've been hanging out with family a little bit the last few days, to be honest, just to ground myself a bit because it's just, I mean, I'm incredibly grateful. And I was like, I've been working on it for years. So every now and then I just think, it's getting received well. Like that's still the thought that's kind of going through my mind, like, people are enjoying it. Like I fully can't comprehend it. Just the fact that, you know, some of the reviews I read on Goodreads, it's like, oh, I tried really hard to. One of them was to make characters' names a little bit easily identifiable. And I was like, yes, I tried really hard to make that work. So
Now, what books or writers inspire you?
I read very broadly. So I'm a bit of a mood reader. I don't have, I like suspense and twisty thrillers. So Christian White's Nowhere Child, I loved that recently. Fleur MacDonald's The Prospect, which is set in Kalgoorlie, loving that. And I read a lot of Aboriginal authors, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So Anita Heiss's Barbed Wire and Cherry Blossoms is one of my favorites because the historical research into the Wiradjuri in New South Wales and the Japanese internments, one of my favorites. Yeah, I read very broadly, but I probably drift back to twisty psychological thrillers in the end.
Me too.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what you're working on next?
Yeah, sequel. So I have become quite attached to Renee, and she's going to go further west. And this time it'll be called Sandalwood. And I want to explore her relationship with her father more. So Melaleuca's a little bit more about Renee and Val, and Sandalwood would be a bit more about Renee and her dad. And obviously a whole new crime. And
Oh, wonderful.
yeah.
That's great. I'm glad that you don't have to give her up so soon.
I know, me too. I would have been sad.
Well, that's time on our interview. Didn't that go quickly?
Wow, that's
I'd like to thank our author, Angie Faye Martin, for chatting with me and for being Reading by Candlelight's June crime thriller book box author.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope the listeners enjoy the show.
And Melaleuca is not only a crime noir about a small town and a local police detective returning to her roots, it's a compelling study of violence against Aboriginal women and systematic racism that First Nations people are subjected to in the past and still today. And Renee's personal struggle between her identity and her position as a police officer is both poignant and masterfully written. As Renee delves deeper into the past, the mystery grows, spotlighting intergenerational cruelty, corruption, and racism as the dark truth of this town, and its people are uncovered. Now, although the location and characters are works of fiction, I think it gives us, you said that it gives us a window to the lived experience of many Aboriginal people, and I think that that was a really strong point of the novel. And it's such a story that will stay with readers long after the chilling twist is revealed. And I dare anyone to guess it because I didn't. And we all know I'm really good at guessing them. So well done, Angie.
Yay.
Thank you all for coming along tonight and watching us live. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening to the podcast, I do hope you've enjoyed this episode. Let us think. Let us know what you think in the Reading by Candlelight Facebook groups or on socials. And thank you again, Angie, for chatting with me
Thank you.
and wishing everyone happy reading and goodbye until the next Reading by Candlelight book club.